Welcome to the SaaS Revolution Show, 0 to 10 edition. I'm your host, Alex Sumer, CEO of SaaStock, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Christian Owens, who is the CEO and co-founder of Paddle. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you back on the podcast, but for the first time on the 0 to 10 sub-series, where we chart the journey of some amazing companies that have gotten to that 10 million ARR milestone. I think you crossed this some time ago, but we kind of want to unpick this a little bit, Christian, so appreciate you sharing that with us. So before we do, again, maybe for those that haven't listened to the previous podcast or don't know who Paddle is, never heard of you before, who is Christian Owens, first of all, and then why did you found Paddle?
Yeah, so I'm Christian Owens, founder, CEO of Paddle. My journey is I guess you could say, interesting one. I taught myself to code when I was very young, started building software when I was very young, fell in love with the internet, built my first software company when I was about kind of 15, 16, dropped out of school, scaled that into a reasonable sized business doing kind of 4 or 5 million in revenue, in a pretty short period of time, over a kind of 18-month period. And that's sort of where I kind of encountered the problems that we now try and solve at Paddle. So we were a B2C or kind of prosumer SaaS business. We were building invoicing software for freelancers. And it was pretty low price product, kind of 100,000 odd customers, selling in every country you can imagine, sort of. And then very quickly we realized we weren't doing the stuff we enjoyed anymore. We weren't building the product and talking to customers. We were dealing with all of this other stuff behind the scenes, like how do you pay taxes and take payments and deal with recurring billing and all of that stuff. And that's really kind of the genesis of Paddle. It's like we went in search for a solution for this. Most of the people we talked to were like, you have to build it yourself from parts. And we kind of thought there must be a better way and started building Paddle to kind of solve all of that back office problem of what we call revenue delivery. So everything from payments, taxes, recurring billing, how do you stay compliant in 100 different countries? How do you deal with all of that stuff? So that's what we do today. I've been building the company over the last 8 years or so. Feels like both a lot longer and a lot shorter than that. But no, it's been a journey.
So launched 2013, something around then?
Yeah, started the company 2012, launched the first version kind of early 2013. Can
you tell us a little bit about that first kind of product launch, the story like behind that, some of the tactics maybe, and what were the results?
Yeah, so Harrison, my co-founder, and I, we were both 18 at the time. It was our first job, like real kind of job. We'd built businesses before, but never built a company. So we had no idea what we were doing. So really the launch process for that, we didn't really know what marketing was or PR was or sort of any of that stuff. The launch process for that was just us talking to companies that we admired. So like products that we used, people that we kind of had come across or read blog posts from in the industry, and running what can be looked back on as a very terrible outbound sales process. But we kind of did that, and it was sort of like a friends and family first set of customers. It was all of these products that we really admired. Our product wasn't particularly great at the time. We really built just the thing that we needed. It was like very bare bones, but it was almost sort of like a instant product market fit, simply because we only spoke to people who looked like us. Like we were building this product for us. So we were two kids in a bedroom trying to build some software, and we went and looked for people who were trying to do the same thing, people who were building software companies at night or on the weekends and had full-time jobs, and we ticked all of the boxes for those people. So it was the story of Paddle is kind of like a very gradually and then kind of all at once situation, where the first couple of years of the business, sort of like we did as much revenue in probably the first sort of 2.5 years of the business as we do in a day today.
I guess, like if we look at it back then, I mean, there were quite a good number of SaaS companies and products around. I mean, now, SaaS is obviously, it's booming, right? And a great place, certainly if you're doing like revenue delivery for SaaS. when you talk about like products that you admired or companies that you admired, so let's say if we put it into context today, I'm going to start a SaaS company, but I admire like Slack and Intercom or Notion. So was it something like that where you had like, I don't know, Basecamp or Intercom or whatever, and say, hey, we're building this product, and you reach out to those guys? Was it the big guys, or was it more
no,
companies that
yeah, I would have loved if it was Notion and Basecamp and Intercom and those guys. It was very much more the people who looked like us, sort of from a company level as opposed to from a product level. So like there's an interesting, I think, phenomenon that happens in sort of, and you see it quite a lot now. It wasn't the case back then, but like now you have the like bootstrap maker community, you have like indie hackers and things like that. And it's all about the one person SaaS company who's going off and they're kind of charting all of their milestones from sort of 1K MRR to maybe they get to 5 or 6 and they quit their job, and then they get to 10 or 20. And some of those companies end up being businesses doing 1 or 2 million a month over time. Not all of them, but kind of more than you think kind of thing actually turn into real businesses as opposed to these things that started as hobbies. So we were really starting with the people who were sort of kind of, they were past that point of this is a hobby and into the point where it was a business. And it was kind of those people that we really admired, because that's what Harrison and I were trying to do, like with the previous one. And we'd succeeded with that. We'd built a kind of 4 million run rate business in a pretty short period of time. But those are the people that we kind of really empathized with. It was the people who loved building a product. It was 1 or 2 people. They didn't have the infrastructure of a business around them. It was just, you love building the product during the day, and then at nighttime you answer customer support tickets and sort of you do all that stuff. So it was really just talking to those people. And I think that's where we were able to strike a chord, which was, there's all of this stuff that you're doing you don't particularly enjoy doing. It's sort of, you love building the product, you love talking to customers, you don't love doing all this other stuff. So as soon as we started having those conversations with people, and these were businesses doing 5, 10, 15, 20 grand a month, they weren't huge, but they were sustainable. As soon as we started having that conversation with people kind of pretty quickly clicked onto the idea.
How long till you got product market fit, and like how did you get there? What were some of the steps to get there?
I think product market fit's an interesting one, because I feel like it's a thing that you constantly like cycle in and out of as a business. Like that first version of Paddle that we launched had almost instant product market fit with those types of people, those 5, 10, 15 grand a month SaaS businesses. And then very quickly, we kind of almost got too big for our boots. And then we're like, okay, we're going to go and sell to the business that does 250K a month. And immediately everything crumbled. Like I remember when we were probably like 2.5 years in, and we realized we were dealing with other people's money. And we were 2 sort of 18-year-olds at that time, kind of 19, 20, never run a business sort of. And we had an investor at the time who was like, you guys should consider hiring like a finance director or a CFO or something. And I remember we found a great CFO, still our CFO today, 7 years later or 6 years later, Hugo. And we just signed 2 months earlier, we just signed our first customer that did like $300,000 a month in volume. So by far our biggest customer, sort of the revenue from that one customer eclipsed the 24 other customers that we had combined. And I remember we sold them, we signed them, they launched. 60 days in, they churned, and it was the day before he was supposed to join as our CFO. And I remember having to call him up and being like, hey, Hugo, really excited for you to join tomorrow. By the way, we just lost 90% of our revenue. Sort of, you cool with that? And fortunately, he had the vision to be like, okay, we'll get through it. But it's kind of the point I'm trying to make is sort of product market fit for us, and I think kind of for other businesses as well, is this cyclical thing that you go through for different segments or different types of customer. And as soon as you sort of expand outside of a certain segment or even geography or size bracket or whatever, you have to kind of go through that process of finding product market fit again and again. Like we're going through it right now as we start to kind of sell into companies who are doing $5 or $10 million a month. in revenue. These are potentially public companies who have a very different set of requirements from those original people who were doing 10 or 15 grand a month in subscription volume. So I think we found it very quickly, but it's probably been a case of trying to reinvent ourselves every 12 to 18 months as we wanted to kind of increase the breadth of kind of applicable customer that we had.
How early on did you first raise capital? Who was that with? How did you do it?
Yeah, so we raised money pre having a business, not because we needed it, but because we had this successful business. We hired somebody to run that, and Harris and I moved to London with a goal. We knew the problem that we wanted to solve. We didn't know how we were going to solve it, and we met a guy called Mark Pearson, who runs a fund now called Fuel Ventures. And he had built a really successful business, completely bootstrapped, did like 20 million-ish in revenue, very profitable. And he was kind of investing his own money. And we met him, and we didn't need the money to start the business. But the thing that we really admired was sort of, we'd built businesses before, but never companies. And he'd built a company with all the infrastructure around it and things like that. So we raised 150K from him, more for the advice than anything else. It was more like a ask for advice, get money type situation. And we went and sat in his office, and that was our first kind of officer's paddle. But that was a process. I met him over Twitter. Like, I saw a tweet, I replied to it. He DM'd me afterwards with like, do you want to get a coffee? It was like a 2-hour meeting where I discussed like the story to date and how loved building products, but ran into this problem and it was a huge headache and nobody's really talking about it. And he basically invested on the spot, which was entirely kind of strange to me. I didn't really know what raising money was. But that happened, sort of, we moved to London, and that's when we started building the business. And sort of, we were so naive at the point, we didn't even realize that we could spend the money. Like, I remember Harrison used to drive 60 miles a day to work in like a Renault Clio that was a death trap. But we didn't realize we were allowed to spend money on like a computer screen. So he used to like shuttle his TV from home to work every day to like plug into his computer and use. And then sort of like, we turn around to the investor and they're just like, you realize like this screen is like 300 pounds. You're allowed to spend that. And it was like all of these moments, like we were so naive about building this business. But so we raised the money, we didn't really use it. And then kind of, we started hiring people and building a team and things like that.
What about I guess that first journey to $1 million in revenue, maybe some of the challenges that you had to overcome to go from 0 to 1 million?
Yeah, I think focus was a big one. Of the same story about us kind of having these customers who were doing $10,000, $15,000 a month in subscription volume, and then going and signing one that was 400. Sounds like a really easy way to kind of shortcut your way to get to $1 million. But it becomes about kind of sustainability. Like, we had that customer for 2 months. Fortunately, since then, we've never really churned any significant size of customer in sort of 7 years since then. But it was because we like really learned our lesson through that, quite painfully learned our lesson through that, of this had to be a gradual process of kind of like chipping away at the customers that we did have product market fit for and gradually expanding product market fit. And I think that all our initial kind of plans and models and things like that had us sort of going from, oh, we're going to sell to these small businesses and then these much larger businesses very, very quickly. And that process took 2 years longer than we thought it would. But the thing that is the beneficial thing in that scenario, it meant that we built a far more like resilient business with hundreds of customers who really loved the product, who they in themselves were growing. But that was like one of the big lessons through sort of that million, is everybody, like everything that we were reading was like, it's a sprint to $1 million. It's sort of like the process of getting from 0 to $1 million, you should do as fast as you possibly can. And we tried to do that. But then we kind of realized it's sort of, if you walk the bit from 0 to $1 million, you build a more robust business, and then you can sprint from 1 to 10 because you have the foundation to be able to do it.
How long, if you don't mind me asking, did it take you to go from, or to get to 1 million in ARR?
So 0 to 1 was probably 3.5, 4 years.
And then 1 to 10?
Like two.
So
2.5, something like that. It was much, much shorter.
What about the challenges from getting from 1 to 10? What were some of the challenges that you can kind of share?
I think everything changes at certain inflection points in a business. Typically, they're based on people as opposed to money, but the two sort of correlate with each other. So you go from being a team of 6 who can sit around one table and everybody knows everything, to a team of 20 where everybody kind of knows everything, to a team of 100 where nobody really knows anything unless you're really deliberate about communicating it. And I think if you take the same approach that we did, which was walk from 0 to 1 and then sprint from 1 to 10, you end up going through those cycles very, very quickly. Like as soon as you fix the communication problem of going from 10 people to 30 people, as soon as you fix that, you're 70 people and it's broken again. So I think for us, it was nothing to do with needing to scale the product or figuring out how we go to market or any of that stuff. It was figuring out how we build the kind of the machine that builds the machine kind of thing. How do we build the company? How do we have forecasting and planning? And how do we hire great people? And how do we capacity plan our offices? We went through 5 offices in 24 months because we just kept adding people and we're like, yeah, well, it'll be fine. We'll just sort of do whatever. And then suddenly you get to the point where the office is fitted out and you've got enough space for people and you filled it all and you need to look for somewhere else. So it was things like that, like real growing pains of growing a business were the hardest things from going from 1 to 10. And it sounds really easy if like we were like, okay, we had the go-to-market stuff down and we had the product stuff down and we could do that stuff. Obviously, there were pains throughout that process as we figured it out. But it was really the learning that all of this other stuff is just huge amounts of pressure and a big distraction from getting good at product or getting good at go-to-market, because like no one's a performing sales rep if they're like they have to do their calls in the toilet because there's no sort of soundproof area for them to do a call. And that was like a reality that we had. And you had people who were sort of significantly demotivated by the fact that they had to go around the corner or to a coffee shop or whatever just to get some work done, literally because this office was jam-packed with humans. And it was sort of all of those other stresses of trying to build a company that I think were the hardest pieces. They were headwinds on all of the other stuff that we were doing really well. And I think if I had to do it again, it would be like invest a little bit more time up front in planning for those different scenarios, because we probably could have gone from 1 to 10 in half the time had we not had all of these stresses and blockers and pain points sort of just operationally and structurally around us that were kind of causing friction.
Well, I was going to say as an aside, but it's not necessarily because we're talking about it. But so you've gone, as you said, through 3-4 offices in 24 months or more, right? And that being a kind of challenge. We're now speaking to each other over Zoom, where just UK is coming out of lockdown, or this kind of version, this tier of lockdown. Do you intend then is everybody in panel coming back to that to the office, or are you doing like we've seen companies like Drift who are saying we're now digital first, but we still have like office hubs? What's happening? I guess from your side on that perspective.
We're kind of doing both. We're certainly being more flexible in one where we hire people to how people want to work. We were always sort of remote friendly, so we had strong contingent of people who would work from home a handful of days a week, or kind of even have reasonable stretches of time where they would kind of work from home or an Airbnb or something like that. We had that in the company. So when all of this stuff hit, we were pretty well set up to deal with it. Going back into it, sort of like we haven't had an office. We let our lease expire for like, we actually haven't had a physical space for about 6 months now. We are in the process of building out a new space, but like our intention is to give everybody the option. Like you can work from wherever you want. My feeling, I really love offices. I love the energy that you get when you walk in. I love being able to collaborate with people and things like that. I think there is a place for that in the day-to-day like workflow of everybody. And like my philosophy around this sort of, and it's a hot topic like internally right now, but my philosophy around this over the last kind of couple of months has been Let's give everybody the freedom to work in the way that they want to work. Let's build the greatest office that we possibly can, like one in London, we'll have one in New York. We might build out others if we discover there are pockets of people that we're hiring in specific locations. Let's build really great offices that people want to come to, not necessarily to go and sit at a desk, but to collaborate with each other and kind of to have meetings and to kind of do all of this stuff. So we're kind of taking that approach of give people the flexibility, but build really cool spaces that people can utilize to do better work than they would be able to over Zoom. It's difficult to get around a whiteboard over Zoom. So like, let's give people the facilities to be able to do that. And then one of the other things that I want to do is introduce, we always used to do these paddle retreats like once a summer. So we would get everybody in the company together and we would go somewhere, but it would be sort of 2 days of like 80% fun, 20% kind of, we'd do some presentation, we talk about our strategy, we'd kind of do some workshops and things like that. I think making a much more deliberate thing of that once or twice a year as we become slightly more distributed, intentionally or not. But like really intentionally having those 1 or 2 times a year that we get everybody together in one place. And we use that as sort of a way for us to articulate our strategy, for people to meet each other. Like we were talking just before this, that so we've hired 50 plus people in the last year that none of us have met. Like we haven't met each other. And I still think there's a really important kind of place for whether that's through an office that people can go to, or whether that's through us just organizing to get everybody from around the world in one location for a period of time.
No, definitely. And I think, again, obviously we've seen this acceleration to remote first, or digital first working, as Drift call it, and there's going to be these scenarios where employees haven't met. If you've hired 50 people you haven't met, and these things are going to become important. And I think as well, and I sort of course read a bit about it, but in terms of perhaps the benefit to conferences, it will be it'll be a place where actually businesses are there going to be meeting with their existing customers and leveraging that, and meeting their teams even. I think even more so seeing that kind of importance of leveraging that conference kind of opportunity, which I hope will be to some extent.
Well, I think that's been true for a while with conferences. Like the reason I always went to conferences was there's a ton of great content, but it's a congregation of a bunch of people in one place that I don't usually get to see in person or meet. Yeah. And then even when the content's great, I watch some of it live, but there's always too much of it to watch live. So I end up watching 90% of it on demand later, either at the hotel room or when I get back home. And I think that if nothing else, sort of those conferences are going to serve a huge purpose to just get people together. I also think there's going to be a massive conference boom as soon as people are able to kind of like travel and see each other as well. I'm desperate to go for a conference. I'm desperate to be jet lagged. Like I haven't been jet lagged in over a year, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah. I don't know, like about desperation with jet lag, but I see the point. I mean, I had 2019, because I didn't really travel in 2020, but I was constantly traveling. But long distance, US, Brazil, Australia, Asia, and it sounds terrible, but it actually wasn't too bad. But afterwards, like going there was never a bad thing, and I always enjoyed that moment, being on the plane and having a bit of like me time, if I'm allowed to kind of like say that. And then you get to the location, Sao Paulo, have a great time there. Then I was always kind of like exhausted. Then you have that flight, and it's you're landing back at 4 a.m. and then you haven't slept, and then it does take that jet lag. It
definitely takes a toll for sure.
Yeah, but definitely, I feel you. Like just having a long distance flight, would be quite nice. Just to do that, having
change the scenery more than anything else. Like
definitely. And what about and we'll go a little bit of off topic, but in terms of the three to five sort of key steps that you took to get to 10 million in revenue.
I think there were a few things. I think nailing our actual like sales process. Like going from that thing of Harrison and I being on a lot of calls with people, and then the big the big mistake that we made in the 1 to 10 range on that stuff was trying to hire salespeople and then train them to act like Harrison or I in a sales process, trying to like emulate us, because obviously that's all we knew. That's what was working. Like, why wouldn't we get the sales reps to come in and tell the same stories and anecdotes and kind of references and things like that? And then you realize, and then I think the thing that we realized was two things were missing from that as a process. One was process. Like, kind of, we were very casually approaching this stuff. So implementing a solid CRM, giving people real discipline around how they use that so that we could use data to make decisions. And then the second thing was, the reason that Harrison and I were successful in a sales process wasn't because of the anecdotes and the stories that we were telling. It was because we were being authentic. It's because we were like speaking about a pain that we had and a challenge that we had, and we were being ourselves. And we were literally hiring people and telling them to come in and do the opposite of that and be inauthentic and not be themselves. So I think as soon as we did those two things, add process, give people resources and materials that they can use, and give them the flexibility to, stay on message, and here's a bunch of materials and things like that, but be authentic and put your own spin on things, and sort of actually build a genuine relationship with a potential customer. That was the kind of turning point for us from a go-to-market perspective. I think one of the second like big learnings was we can't please everyone. Like, from a product build perspective, I think when you're in the probably $0 to $1 million range, number of customers you have is small enough. They all kind of look pretty similar. And when one of them asks for something, it usually makes pretty logical sense to apply to all. And as you start to kind of expand the group of customers you're going after, go after different customers who maybe have slightly different needs, I think for slightly too long, we tried to please everybody in that process rather than getting really narrow and really specific about what it was that we were good at. So learning when to say no to customers on, like, we're probably not going to implement that feature in the next 6 months. But also knowing when to say no to the wrong revenue as well. It's very, very tempting when you're doing $1 million a year in revenue and a customer comes along that would pay you $200,000 a year, and your gut's telling you like, oh, $200,000 a year, like 20% bump in revenue immediately. But everything else is telling you that this is going to be a disaster for whatever reason. Pricing's bad, sort of the product isn't quite a good fit, there's too many workarounds, whatever it is. Like, that voice is probably right. And we did that a couple of times of take on customers that we probably shouldn't have for the revenue. And sort of in a number of instances, we were able to make them work out, and everybody was happy and we were able to satisfy the customer and things like that. In other instances, sort of we learned the hard way that those are the customers that you sink a ton of time into at the expense of potentially 10 other customers that would have been in aggregate worth more than that one. So I think that around kind of sales rigor and getting that right, saying no to things and getting really hyper-focused and specific on product, knowing when to say no to wrong revenue, I think would be my top three. And then the fourth one is that naturally occurs as you start to get north of $1 million, is you can probably get to $1 million with you almost managing or knowing or kind of being involved with either, you're probably still involved with every key hiring decision at 10 million, but you're certainly not involved in the day-to-day management of those people, especially if you're like 30, 40, 50 people in the organization. So getting really good at managing people and hiring people who will manage others. That was one of that was the layer of the business that we underinvested in for a long time. We really invested in the like individual contributors. How do we hire the best product manager or engineer or sales rep or whatever it is? We really invested in the exec team as well. Like, how do we hire a really solid VP sales or CTO or whomever it is? And we neglected that kind of like middle management piece because it had the word middle management in it. And we were like, that's a dirty word. No one should ever go anywhere near middle management. They serve no purpose. And then you realize when you're 50 people and it's all a bit unwieldy and people don't know what their job prospects are and people are leaving and things like that, you realize, okay, this does serve a purpose. You have to be really deliberate about building it out. And that's one of the, I think, the key things, maturing points that you have to go through as a SaaS business on the road from 1 to 10 as well.
What about yourself as a CEO? So CEO of the business at the age of 18, therefore, like, you know, a lack of experience in those kind of early days. How have you learnt to be a good CEO? Like, obviously now you've got, what have you got? Like, you know, 7-8 years, you know, of experience, but like over time, how have you learned? When did you actually feel comfortable in the CEO shoes as well?
Yeah, I think it was a difficult one for me. I think there was a version of the CEO that I thought I should be. Like, I think at the beginning, like, there was just me. It was me and Harrison dividing, conquering, sort of, if he didn't do something, I would do it. If I didn't do something, he would do it. Kind of, you pick up slack for each other, and the goal is the goal. You just get it done. And then I think as we matured from being like kind of two of us in a room to a company, I think there was the version of the CEO that I thought I should be that comes out in books and like all that stuff. And then the version of the CEO that I think other people thought I should be. And then the version of the CEO that I wanted to be. And I think sort of, it's really easy, I think, when all of those three things are the same. But I think in oftentimes, like, they're not the same. It's like a big Venn diagram of sort of the areas of overlap are kind of smaller and bigger in some areas than others. And I think the thing that I found about myself was I really loved product. I really loved the thing that we were building. I really loved thinking about the future, like the long term, like what could we build this into? I was good with customers, but I wasn't great at running that like structured process of running a deal. I was technically reasonably competent, but self-taught. And as we started to scale, that probably wasn't an area that I should touch anymore. I really enjoyed marketing and sort of telling the story and sort of like really defining the things that we stood for as a company. And I think the expectations of myself was I have to be good at all of these things. And then I think the thing that I really realized over time and started to mature is I can pick those things. The important thing is not the important thing is that those other things sort of don't get neglected. So it then becomes about like my job, number one, is probably make sure we don't run out of money. And number two is make sure that like we have the right people in the business to lead those things that Harrison or I individually aren't very good at or don't want to do. And I think the latter thing is a tricky one sometimes, especially for like first-time founders, of like there feels like there's this expectation on you that like maybe you don't want to do these things, but that's what a CEO does. CEO is involved in the detailed forecasting and financial planning and comes up with the budget alongside the finance team and things like that. For me, like the best way of doing that was to hire the best CFO that we could and be like, Hugo, I will support you in every way that I can and making this plan the best that it can possibly be. But you're going to be 100 times better than I ever am at kind of doing this piece of work. Go run with it. But I will back you up in whatever way possible. And I think that's probably a thing that I have only fully come to grips with in the last like kind of couple of years of being okay at saying like, nope, I'm not going to get involved in that. There's a piece of me that's like fighting against that because I always want to be involved in everything and sort of lack of control and sort of all that stuff. But I think biggest learning for me was accept the things you're not good at and the things that you don't want to do and don't do them.
Yeah, it's I think it's good advice. I know that when if your business is looking to scale up, if you're looking to reach any kind of scale, I think it's something that a CEO probably needs to come to terms with and say, what am I good at and how can I get people that are better than me, you know, into those seats. And I mean, I've not long read like Rocket Fuel, I think by Gino Wickman, and talk about the visionary integrator role. And often what we see with the scale-up CEOs, that they're the visionaries, they founded the company and they love doing these certain things like, you know, marketing, telling the story, speaking to customers, etc. And then, you know, getting the integrators in to do the less, I don't know, sexy stuff, but where they can
the stuff that actually keeps the machine running there, like
exactly,
like that makes it successful.
whilst we're all on long haul flights to some nice
exactly to exciting places around the world to tell stories.
That's it. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. If you could go back to when you founded the business, from what you know now, what advice would you give to yourself?
Like, probably just like slow down and enjoy it. Like, it's really fun. Like, we get to come to work every day, work on a thing that we enjoy working on, hopefully, build a product that we think should exist. We're in the really fortunate position specifically at Paddle that we get to hopefully help thousands of other SaaS businesses, and we love SaaS businesses. I think Harrison and I have always been guilty of never celebrating wins, or very, very rarely celebrating wins, to the point where it's become a bit of like a running joke, where like we will hit a milestone that we've been talking about for years, and then we'll spend all of like 3 minutes being like, oh yeah, cool, like what's the next one? And I think kind of if I could start again, I'd be like, take a minute, like for each one of those things, because like it's kind of like a grass is always greener thing, of you're 3 people in a room trying to build a thing, and you're always thinking about like the milestone in the future, and you're thinking, it will be great as soon as we hire this CFO, or it'd be great as soon as we hire this strategic account exec, or the CMO, or this person, or as soon as we hit 5 million in revenue, like kind of we'll kind of pause and take a minute. And I think every single one of those instances, we haven't done that. We've just kind of plowed ahead. And I think kind of you very quickly, although maybe it's a sprint from 1 to 10, it's certainly a marathon from 1 to 100. And I think sort of, especially, I think the last year has taught us all this as well, of like you can very quickly get into a position where all you do is eat, sleep, breathe, work. And I don't think, honestly, there's anything wrong with that if you love it. But I do think that sort of you can make space to celebrate kind of when you do something well. And I think as the company grows as well, and I think this would be the lesson to myself, is like, it's not, you don't celebrate those wins for you if you don't need it. If Harrison and I don't need a self pat on the back to say, oh, we hit 20 million in revenue, or 30, or whatever the number is, or whatever the thing that gets us out of bed in the morning is, like the team that you build does, like the group of 200 people that work at Paddle, like it's not fair on them to kind of skip over the things that they work so hard for, especially as we elevate into roles that aren't rolling our sleeves up as much and getting down and building the feature, or winning the customer, or taking the flight to do the meeting. And it's important that we acknowledge that stuff. So that would be my one key piece of advice for myself, because I think you probably have a much more fun time of it, and everybody else probably feels much more appreciated kind of throughout that journey for just pausing and taking a second to acknowledge when you do something good.
Definitely. Final questions. I'm conscious of time, but it is the final question, so we should be good. What are the top resources that perhaps have helped you know, in this journey, and the ones that you would, I guess, recommend for founders listening?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of books that I think I really like, the books that don't necessarily tell you so much what to do, but tell you sort of either what not to do or what they did. So I think Hard Thing About Hard Things is a great book. That's probably my favorite, just because I think like after reading that book, you realize whatever's going wrong in your company, it could be probably 10 to 100 times worse, and there could be 10 to 100 times more pain. I think more than anything else, the thing that's helped me is just knowing and talking to and building a kind of network with other people who are building companies, regardless of if they're 10 times bigger than us or 10 times smaller than us. Everybody's going through the same stuff all the time. I think things like SaaS Stock have really helped for that. I have like people, and we text now obviously because we can't meet each other, but like I have people who we joke with, like conference friends, like we only ever see each other and go to dinner and like have fun and whatever at conferences, but that used to be 3 or 4 or 5 times a year, which is more than I see kind of my normal friends sometimes. So I think kind of really just building a network of people, and very quickly you realize that these people who kind of tweet great like kind of pithy quotes and have shining articles about them and everything are in exactly the same situation, stressing about the exact same things. And I think that kind of camaraderie and sort of like togetherness that you get just out of having a community of people. I think I've learned more from like the group of people that you know as well as I know, because we all meet at your events. I've learned more from those people than I have from any book or blog post or kind of anything else. So I would say kind of invest time in that. And they tend to be the most forgiving relationships as well, because if you ignore a text for a month because you've been snowed under, like they're the only people in the world who truly get it in comparison to the people that you know because you live next door to them or whatever.
Yeah, no, good stuff. Great advice. Well, Christian, been a fantastic guest. Where can people find you and Paddle online? Yeah,
so paddle.com for paddle stuff. If you want to reach me directly, it's just christian@paddle.com. I'm on Twitter, Christian B. Owens. Couldn't get it without the B, unfortunately. But maybe one day when I'm big enough.
Hope the B is real. Good stuff, Christian. Thanks so much for being a great guest on the SaaS Revolution Show 0 to 10 edition.
Cool. Thanks, Alex.